next session is a new friend of IHRB. Phil Bennett is a technology strategist and has been a key part of the work that's being undertaken to develop the Global Data Partnership Against Forced Labour, which is one of the key initiatives that we're all talking about now. And this session, with two online panelists as well, is about building a federated database for analysis and intervention. Phil, over to you.
Thank you very much. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch. My name is Phil Bennett. As Neil said, I'm facilitating, moderating the next panel, which is a third of the tech panels here. This one will discuss technology, but particularly also the interrelationship between the technology and actually reality. I think a quote that I sometimes go back to is something that Richard Feynman, a physicist, notable physicist, said actually many years ago. And he said, for a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. And that can mean a lot of different things. But for us working in the sector of forced labor, the topic of data and technology can't really be discussed on its own without the complex understanding and recognizing the complexities that actually this is a human and societal issue, not a technology issue. And so I'm delighted that the panelists who I'll introduce shortly, we are going to be discussing some of the practicalities, I would say, based upon previous experience. This idea of a federated infrastructure, which is the key ideas here are around data sharing, deriving impact from that, but hopefully also in a way that reduces the barriers to data sharing, perhaps, as was mentioned before, in a way that reduces the power structures that are, well, we're not short of power structures, frankly, in the sector, are we? In many different ways, data included, but either way, during the path to sort of building or developing a system like this that's genuinely useful, we have to look at what we've done before in previous projects with data, particularly when we're looking to derive impact. And so in this panel, in the first couple of parts, we're going to be looking at how data is acquired, how it's transformed to be useful from lots of different organizations. And then crucially, we're going to have a discussion on if you like, the closing the gap between developing these insights that technology can help us with and actually getting to action and recognizable impact. So I'm delighted to introduce our panel. We've got two panelists who are virtual here, and Wenjue Yao, who's joining me on stage in Bangkok for those who are joining remotely. So I'd like to just ask each of the panelists just to introduce themselves just briefly. I'm sure they can do a better job at that than I. So I might start actually, Wenjue, with yourself. Wenjue is from Federated. I'm delighted to recognize you. And yes, please give us a quick introduction.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I am the Senior Director of Programs and the Regional Lead for Asia at Federated. For those that you don't know, Federated is a nonprofit organization headquartered in the United States and operating globally. Our former CEO, Dan Widerman, is here. He makes me a little nervous here.
It's that grin, isn't it? It's that grin.
Yeah. We work to improve supply chain labor conditions through assessment, human rights due diligence consulting, capacity building, and research. Addressing the issue of forced labor is one of the core areas of our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Wenjue. So next, just online, we have Briar Hume, who works for Impact as a consultant. If we can just switch the screen to Briar. Briar, would you be able to give us a quick introduction? I think you're calling from London. Just hold on a sec, Brian. We've got a speaker issue. Just hang on.
Better?
We sort out the tech. Can you try again?
Hello?
Perfect. Please start again. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, everyone. It's really great to be part of this panel. As Phil said, my name's Briar. I'm a consultant at Impact and based in the London office. And for those of you who don't know, we are a leading management consultancy specialising in ethical trade and human rights, with a real focus on making what works for workers work for business. So I'm currently working on a really interesting project that I'm excited to tell you all about today, working with a multitude of stakeholders to create a freely accessible global database of recruitment risks with a particular focus on recruitment fees and related costs. So yeah, really excited to be here. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Briar. So we're moving seamlessly from London to the other side of the world there to Australia. And there we have Hannah Tignani from DigiNext. Hannah is a director of technology there. Hannah, would you be able to give us a quick introduction of yourself and DigiNext, please?
Oh, thanks, Phil. My name is Hannah. I work at DigiNext as the Director of Supply Chain Technology, Research and Development. So at DigiNext, we develop systems to support organizations to identify labor exploitation and forced labor in their supply chains. Sometimes specifically with the brand, so looking at brands, suppliers, recruiters, and workers to get a better understanding of practices at work, and other times specifically worker voice focused. Our technology is also used by worker-led organizations and NGOs and other UN entities to also look for practices of exploitation and how they change over time. While working at DigiNext, I led a research group at in the tech against trafficking space within the UN. So I've got that academia experience as well.
Thanks very much, Hannah. I'm realizing I think this might be the most geographically distant panel I think I've moderated from between Bangkok, London, and Australia, done seamlessly. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much to the panelists. So we're going to be talking about acquiring data, transforming, driving impact from it. Please remember that you can ask questions. So I will be aiming to leave 15 or 20 minutes at the end to take questions from you. You do that with the Zoom app. Just join the session, click questions as you would do with a normal Zoom app, and we'll come to those a little bit later. Okay, so Wenjue, I'm going to ask you to kick us off. And I think what we want to talk about here are some of the methods for gathering data. We often talk about data in itself, but actually the process of gathering data in a way that's both useful, ethical, and so on, across sort of different partners in Verite. Can you just tell us what have you found that works? Just generally, what are just sort of nuggets of wisdom, and even what doesn't work, to sort of tell us what not to do?
Thank you, Phil. So I'll just say a few words. Well, probably a lot that I want to say. So I prepared some like my talking notes so I can read it out to you. Then I'll say what works and what doesn't. Yeah. So at Verite, we gather migrant worker related data through a few different channels and methodologies. First is our on-site forced labor risk assessment. These assessments cover all 11 ILO indicators and include interviews with management, workers, and labor agents, document record reviews, and inspections of worker dorms and facilities. This is something that Lisa referred as like strangers going in. That's part of the work that we do. And the second is our remote risk assessment through our Cumulus online platform. We use a 6-point risk framework to screen suppliers nominated by buyers. This framework covers the full recruitment and employment cycle of migrant workers, looking at risks associated with recruitment fees and the related costs, induced indebtedness, other ethical recruitment practices, as well as transparency and due diligence, freedom of movement, and supplier management systems related to forced labor and human trafficking. Entities going through this screening complete a questionnaire and provide supporting documents. We cross-check the data with audit reports and publicly available sources to identify any potential risks. The third is primary and secondary research, including community-based worker data gathering. Examples of such work include our forced labor research in the electronic sector in Malaysia, the responsible sourcing tool, the fostering fee accountability and cost tracking project, and the recruitment cost calculator, or RCC. With the fostering fee accountability and cost tracking project, we developed a mobile app and shared it through community-based worker organizations in origin countries and directly with workers. Workers used it to report fees they paid, loans they took, and details about their working conditions. These workers either are still working abroad or shortly after return home. The recruitment cost calculator that we developed was to support employers moving from a worker pay model to a employer pay model by giving them a baseline of specific costs they should be paying based on different migration corridors. So in certain sense, our own data and the data collection resembles a mini ecosystem of federated data system and its potential values, such as bringing together data from different sources, including auditors, brands, suppliers, NGOs, and workers, to get a fuller and more transparent picture of what's happening. So triangulation of data points works. Brands are more willing to push suppliers to reimburse workers when presented with evidence, right? However, part of what doesn't work is that the risk data at entity level is proprietary. Everyone knows that migrant workers in certain corridors are at extreme risk of debt-bonded forced labor, but the data at supplier entity level is not shared. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think what's interesting about Federated, you've got lots of stakeholders. So you mentioned sort of companies as well, and also getting information from workers and from migrants, and sort of the different relationships there must be quite complicated. I think some of the things I've learned from non-profits who work on the ground is this element of trust that's necessary, isn't it? With whoever your stakeholder is. Yes, interesting. Thank you so much, Wenjuet. Briar, I want to come to you next. And I know that you mentioned briefly in your introduction just on some of the projects you're working on, which involves, must involve processing data from sort of many different sources and different partners. Could you just give us a quick, give us a summary really of some of these challenges that you encounter with processing data from different organizations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like this project that I referred to earlier, it's definitely been...
Brian, just pause a second. We've got a speaker issue again. 1 moment. Yeah, hang on. Yep, and yes, we're done. Go for it.
Yeah.
Yep, good to go.
Yeah, great. I think I was just saying, I think the project I referred to earlier, it's definitely been a learning journey for us all. So maybe I'll just present you our top 3 challenges that we faced. I think probably one of the key ones to note here, one of the major challenges we face, we've been gathering data from multiple sources, both public and private. And I think navigating the diversity of data that we've collected from these multiple sources has been a real challenge. So we've currently reviewed, I think, 40 publicly available sources, and also have been very successful in collecting data from 14 private providers. So all of these partners that we're working with, we all do really great, really rigorous work. But I think the challenge has been we're all doing this work in very different ways, taking very different approaches, producing very different outputs. And so one of the key concerns raised, particularly by organizations like the ILO, was around inconsistencies and gaps in the data and how different methodologies used by our different partners would affect the comparability and the reliability of the data we were collecting. And I'd say our kind of informally, our mantra has become perfection is the enemy of progress. Because if we were to wait for perfect data sets to be able to collect, we would have just been paralyzed in terms of progress. So instead, we've kind of accepted that whilst the data we're collecting might be imperfect and it may not meet the standards of, the rigor of international organizations or academic research, instead, by aggregating such a large pool of data, we can overcome this challenge and still be able to kind of pull out robust insights. So I would say in terms of one of the main challenges, that would be it. But also just kind of going back to data collection, I would say another one we've struggled with just is organizational capacity. So many of the organizations we're working with at the moment, both for-profit and non-profit, are obviously facing resource constraints. And so one of our main challenges has just been how to encourage them to spend their limited resources and time with us. So one thing we've actually really recognized has been the power of identifying shared pain points and shared motivations. So at the very beginning of the project, we very much were focusing on showcasing the positive PR that would come with being on our project and showcasing the branding opportunities. But actually, we quickly learned that just by demonstrating this project as a clear solution to a shared problem that all our partner brands are, battling with on a daily, weekly basis, they were far more eager to participate, because I think they could see and they could trust that this project would actually directly address one of the key challenges they're working with. So that was just a really useful insight that we've gleaned. And then finally, I think just going back actually to what you were mentioning before, Phil, about trust, I think one of the other challenges has just been how to design a trusted and robust system for data sharing and governance. So throughout the project, we've had many concerns raised around who accesses the data, who manages the data, GDPR compliance, confidentiality, competitive sensitivity, and also there were some concerns around if brands shared their data with us, does this create any kind of legal liability for them to repay recruitment fees they've found deep within their supply chains? And so I think really particular to this panel, we've been very successful in establishing a federated model for data sharing, with Impact acting as a neutral convener and the partners agreeing to common protocols for data sharing. And I feel like this model has been really successful in just removing hierarchies, like you mentioned earlier, Phil, and just ensuring that no one brand has control or ownership of the data. So I would say that's actually been really successful in kind of encouraging brands to participate with the project.
That's fascinating. I mean, when we had our call prior, I was genuinely amazed at sort of the work you managed to do in must have been cajoling these different organizations to provide some of this recruitment information. And this is foremost on my mind around, improving data sharing is this trust component. I saw a quote, I think, on another conference that says data can only travel at the speed of trust, which, is relationship building, and it doesn't matter, is it, where, you're connecting with a vulnerable person on the ground, or whether it's a high-power corporate in California. Actually, that relationship building is just a key part. Thank you very much, Briar. Hannah, I wanted to come to you because I think we talked about being able to acquire the data, but in terms of making this actually useful, sometimes we use the word signal as a way of sort of categorizing data that tells us something useful in tackling forced labor. But I always worry that interpreting that is super difficult, especially sort of given what Brian was saying, that in terms of how this sort of data comes in different places and different contexts and so on. What are the challenges here? How do we interpret risk or indicators of abuse in data in your experience?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we've had two really great examples just now of Verite and Impact, and how they have this just information that comes together and they're trying to put it together. I think fundamental is to begin with that real understanding that each of these parties has collected data for a very specific purpose, and they're choosing to share it or not to share it. And so if we're looking at federated data, we need to make sure that the way we collect and share data maintains that original meaning of the data that was collected in the first place. And often that's also including the context in there. So for data, for example, to be useful to others, we need to have this common understanding of what was collected. On the fundamental level, what are we talking about when we talk about risk? Is this risk to a worker? Is this risk to a business's reputation? Is this a risk of further causing or contributing to or being linked to modern slavery? A really core understanding that needs to be in common. And I guess it was what was being referred to by the other panelists as well. When looking at the indicators of abuse, for example, I found this really important to have a standard to fall back on, so that there can be a common understanding in the data we're collecting. I know Wenyan just referred to it as well, but I'm a big fan of the ILO 11, the indicators of forced labor. And I normally would augment them with things like the ILO's fundamental principles and rights at work. So you can have some kind of a framework, which I always call my taxonomy of exploitation, which allows us to get the information and categorize it in ways that other people will be able to understand it as well. Maybe a point to add there is that when you're looking at forced labor and human trafficking and comparing across different countries, these terms have legal definitions, and that legal definition changes in different countries. So by collecting this more nuanced, or tagging with meta information, this more nuanced information, it allows you to internationalize and further share the data, making it more useful for other people.
It's super interesting, because you sort of, I think all the panelists are sort of indicating to me at the moment that if you don't take into account that context and underlying meaning, not just generally, but across each separate organization and source, we entirely get the wrong outputs and a misrepresentation of really what's being said. It's fascinating. Thanks so much, Hannah. Briar, actually, I just want to come back to you on this around your recruitment data project. Could you just give us a summary of some of the tech you used on that, perhaps to tackle some of these different standards or formats?
Yeah, I would honestly say tech has been a game changer for us on this project. So I have to check my notes for this, because just to give you some context, the data we've collected so far spans over 10,000 individual worker interviews, working at over 250 companies, covering over 30 origin countries and over 10 destination countries. So as you can imagine, that would have taken a huge amount of time for us to analyze and process manually. So instead, we've worked with a really great AI company to create what we lovingly call our wood chipper, which basically is an AI model that we can feed huge amounts of data in any format. And the model is able to analyze this data and pull out key themes and pieces of information that we have trained it to recognize. So not only, obviously, is this a huge benefit in that we can analyze huge amounts of data very, very quickly, but I would actually say, more importantly, it's been really great for removing a barrier to entry for our data contributors. So instead of them having to spend the time standardizing their data or editing it into certain formats, they've been effectively able to just throw any data they have in our direction, and we've been able to take it in any format they can give it us. But I would say there's been a couple of lessons learned throughout. So firstly, just maintaining both the expert and the human touch has been really important to us. So I say expert because I'm not sure if some of you are aware, but AI has a tendency to do something called hallucinate, where it will basically just dream up or falsify information that isn't correct. So we've always made sure to have a human rights expert overseeing the outputs, just to make sure it kind of aligns with what we would expect. But also, I think you mentioned this in the intro, Phil, just this is a very sensitive and complex issue that we're dealing with, and we're very conscious not to just outsource the solutions to technology. So we've always got that human touch maintained. And then secondly, I'd say one of the lessons learned that we have probably learned the hard way is just that innovation takes patience. I know that definitely ourselves at Impact, and I'm sure our partners have felt frustrated at times with just the amount, the length of time it takes this process just to iteratively design our AI model. But I would just say, kind of reflecting on that, it has been essential just to make sure that the final output is genuinely impactful for workers and genuinely useful for businesses.
That's really interesting. And Brian, just a quick additional question. So some examples of how that AI is working. Is it pulling out kind of features of these questionnaires, sort of the answers to it, which are sort of in common? Is it like sort of payment questions? Yeah.
So basically, we have an Excel template that the AI filters all the different types of data and will pull out key pieces of information that we've requested it to pull out. So, for example, quantitative data on recruitment fees paid, but then also qualitative data. So, for example, if we have site assessments where workers are reporting what they like and what they don't like, what challenges they're facing at work, it can also pull out that qualitative as well. And we've made sure that the methodologies that we're using align kind of with best practice. So we've worked very closely with organizations like the ILO, for example, to make sure it aligns with their definitions of recruitment fees and related costs.
That's interesting. And I think, and just your sort of lessons learned on the fact that just don't trust the technology, at least until you've got confidence in it, and to test it is actually just something I've written down. So I think in a second, we're going to talk about sort of the impact. But I just wanted to quickly touch base with you, Hannah, again, just on the other barriers and workarounds that you've seen in your projects as well. If you're able to sort of, Hannah, give us a quick summary of those that you've seen.
Sure. I also have a question I was going to ask Brian, but I'll do that later about her system. One of the barriers is always people being concerned about data privacy and being able to assure them that data that they disclose is anonymous, and we really protect their privacy so that there can't be any reprisal. At Diginex, with our Worker Voice tool Apprise, what we do is we have a switch where organizations can turn on a feature to collect the worker's phone number if they want to leave it. So there's this option of adding that at the end, but just making sure that workers understand where this information goes to. And then from a brand's perspective, if they're going to be collecting this information, they really now need to do something with it. You can't have someone leave their contact details and not be contacted. So looking at that kind of trade-off. One of the bigger concerns is more also about attribution. If you have some way of sharing data between an organization, time and money to collect data. And we had on the panel before your lunch from Carola from AIM Progress about the data collection that they were doing as well. It costs a lot of money to have the people go out and collect the data. So a question really needs to be asked: if some participants are going to be collecting data or more than others, how is that attributed to each of the people? And maybe more importantly, are we making sure that there is benefit that also goes to the workers who are sharing their personal stories as well? At least any poor conditions that they are disclosing need to be sorted out as well. In other cases, what I've seen is problems with competitive edge. So sometimes brands are not willing to disclose what they have found because they think it's something that will help them in the market over their competitors. So having that shared understanding at the beginning of what can be done with data. One,
Oh, sorry, carry
sorry?
on. Yeah, carry on.
Okay, I was going to say one thing I will add came as I was listening to one of the panels earlier today. People were talking about sharing there as well, and sharing. I think it was actually your panel, Phil. People were talking about sharing about good practice in this federated database, and not only for conditions but things like wet. And it made me want to point out we need to make sure when we have data that we're going to be sharing, that we also share context, because there's no one intervention that will work the same way in all contexts that it's used. There are so many different factors like cultural norms, power, or political structures that really shape and influence the outcome of programs. So ensuring this rich metadata is associated with the information that we're sharing to make sure that the best can be achieved for the workers on the ground.
Yeah. There's a lot of great points there. Thank you so much, Hannah. I think, I mean, we talked about, I think, on a previous panel, the potential as data becomes more useful, there is also this risk that we become more extractive as a sector and constantly request more data for workers. Isn't there around, how do we ensure there's equity here in ensuring workers actually are recognized really for that contribution and that there's proper attribution for that? I think that's a very good point. So just before we're going to talk about, in a minute, just talk about the impact, Wei-Juen, I'm going to ask you this question in a minute, but as a reminder, please do put your questions in. We're going to carve out 15 minutes at the end. Any questions that you have for the panelists, even if we don't know the answers, we can discuss them and agree that we don't know the answers. It's fine. But yeah, do get your questions into the Zoom app. So I want to sort of start now a discussion about the impact, because so many tech projects sort of seem to result in very fancy looking illustrations that we present at panels like this, right? And actually, even when I worked in the private sector, it was so hard, or it seemed to be so hard, to move from the insights that we've worked so hard to gain through getting this data, taking into account all the context and language and culture that has been mentioned. So it's a super easy question, Wen-Juen. How do we cross this gap between sort of getting these insights and getting the impact? What's the trick? Is there one, or is it no?
The easy question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Before I get into impact, I think the earlier point about our concern about extracting so much data from workers and how to properly, acknowledge them. So that really is a great segue for one point that I would like to make, is that based on our long experiences in this field, we believe that most data collection effort in current responsible recruitment assessment fail to capture one critical data point: the fees paid by accountable party, the employer. Because we're collecting data from workers. Really, all the effort is concentrated there. And the data often tell us what the workers paid, but don't usually tell us what the employers actually covered. Yeah. So too often we stop at where are the risks? How much are workers owed in reimbursements? And how should they get reimbursed? These are very important questions, but they're still about remediations after the harm has already occurred. if we want to move beyond analysis and remediation and get into the impact that we're looking for, we need to really get into proactive preventions. We need for us to get into proactive preventions, we need better data on the fees paid by employers. Well, we all understand if workers are paying, it means employers did not pay, right? The reality remains. As the saying goes, what gets measured gets done. So we all want to shift towards an employer pay model, yet employer payments are still not at the center of data collection efforts. So all of us are doing a disservice to the victims of forced labor if we're not pushing for change at the employer level when it comes to paying for recruitment costs. How suppliers and buyers split the cost is their challenge to work out. But the fact, I recognize the people in this room may not like to hear some comments that I'm making, but I thought I would just say it anyway as a nonprofit representative. Okay, so so if the fact that it's difficult or they're unwilling, that should not be an excuse to focusing only on risks as a way to divert attention from real accountability. At the end of the day, building a federated system isn't just about data architecture. It's about purpose, right? So if our goal is to stop recruitment abuse before they happen, we have to collect and track the right data and make the data actionable. Collecting and tracking the right data means putting employer-paid data front and center. This is about payment accountability. That means not only tracking what employers paid clearly and consistently. We already heard comments from different parties about the inconsistency in data collection. So we need to solve that issue, the consistency issue. But also verification is important. We need to verify those payments against the applicable costs for the corridor or sectors. And also corroborating employers have paid all the costs by interviewing workers to ensure workers have not also been charged. So this is about the collecting right data. And making the data actionable means that the data insights should be actionable by different stakeholders, such as suppliers, buyers, labor agents, and most importantly, worker organizations and the worker themselves. A data system may not be able to enforce compliance, but they can support it by making insights actionable. The good news is that some organizations have started tracking employer-paid recruitment fee data. Before coming to this conference, I had a meeting with the HR person of a supplier facility in Malaysia that has used our recruitment fee calculator as a reference to require their labor agents to report itemized recruitment fee data. This enables the supplier to make proper payments to all recruitment costs across different origin countries. We were truly encouraged by their actions. Jackie, if you're online, a big thank to you. The actions that the data may lead to include how employers contracting with labor agents. We need to know that. Yeah, well, they can use our data to take that actions, and how buyers making sourcing decisions. I think an earlier panel mentioned about that too, and how suppliers design their improvement plans, and how worker empowerment programs are designed before they depart their origin country. So data can and should also be used creatively to facilitate cost sharing between suppliers and buyers for remediations. In this way, the data system supports real change and helps to prevent harm, which makes the system more impactful. Thank you.
That's a really interesting point around sort of the data that we're missing. We tend to gravitate, don't we, to getting data that's relatively easy rather than looking at it the other way from the impact and what data do we need. It's a really good point. And yeah, and the various stakeholders and providing sort of personalized insights rather than generic. Thanks so much. I'm going to come to Briar and Hannah just for brief comments on that before we go to questions. I think Briar first. Any sort of thoughts on Wenjue's comments, or indeed your own sort of insights and ideas for actually getting the impact we need from the data?
I think what she was talking about in terms of usability and stakeholder engagement. So at the moment, we're in the phase of kind of collecting the data, analyzing the data, but phase 2 of the project will be, how do we present this data in a meaningful way? And I know, Phil, when we spoke last, you were kind of cautious that we present this data, we spend so long, analyzing it, and then nobody actually uses it. And so I think all of the partners engaged on this project are very, very conscious of making this a usable tool and not just something that kind of sits in the corner and grows cobwebs. But yeah, I think stakeholder engagement is key. And obviously at Impact, we're very, very keen on worker voice and worker centricity. And so I think it was Hannah that just mentioned as well, just, even making sure that workers are able to, we want this to be a globally freely accessible tool to anyone, not just companies, but so workers can go on and see the common risks associated with the migration channel they're about to embark upon. What are the fees that are typically paid? And it's just about laying that information transparently, but also in a way that is digestible and usable.
And I think, am I right in saying, Briar, that you kind of co-developed this almost with your partners, right? It wasn't just your organization going off for like 12 months and then coming back going, ta-da! So you're saying, I think sort of co-development is a key part of this. Yeah,
we're a very close team. I think we have calls every other week and lots of emails.
Yeah.
Like, I think all of the partners are very passionately engaged, which is great because you do just get that diverse kind of input so that we make sure that what we're producing is relevant.
Thank you so much. Hannah, any comments from yourself on this topic?
Yeah, I guess I would also want to ask a question. If we're looking at how do we make projects impactful, and who should be involved in that, my question or counter question would be, who gets to define what impact looks like? I remember we were looking at a project with, I think it was ILO, and looking at recruitment fees and costs in different South Asian countries going to Hong Kong. And they were like, it's not about the recruitment fees. I don't even want to go. I want to stay home. Why don't you look at how we can have more jobs at home? That should be the question that you're trying to ask, instead of looking at stopping these overseas recruitment fees. So for me, that was just a good reminder that we think we know the questions, but we're not asking the people who are on the ground who are affected what they would prefer,
Yeah. Oh, it's a really good point, isn't it? How projects are kind of predefined before they begin, right? With the desired impact rather than asking what people need. It's a really good point. Thank you so much, Hannah. I'm just going to ask us if we've got any questions. We've got a nod. Yeah, please. Let's sit here. I think 3 or 4 questions at a time, and we'll ask the panelists to give their best attempt at some answers.
We've got actually many questions coming in. Shall I give you by threes?
Let's do three at a. Let's do four at a time. Let's do four at a time if that's all right, and we'll try and get through as many as we can.
The first question is, we've heard a lot about the value of data and the challenges of a federated data system, but little about how collected data is used. Several panel participants have used the word insight. Can panelists explain the actions taken in response to these insights and give an example of the unique value gained? And then in relation to that, we have a second question. Can you describe some of the ways that the data project may be helpful for trade unions and organizations that support workers? A third question. We talk a lot about gathering data, but what about formatting? If formatting isn't aligned, data can be extremely difficult to amalgamate meaningfully. Do you share common frameworks for data formatting in collection and processing? And the fourth one is, do you have anything around worker ownership of data, or anything to avoid partaking in surveillance capitalism under the guise of human rights?
Excellent, fabulous questions. So as a review of these, I think sort of examples of how data is used to create action from those insights. I think the inference there being lots of discussion about insights, but actually how does that convert, and any examples? Question 2, trade unions. How can this support trade unions, collective action? Number 3, data formatting, what needs to be done? And number 4, worker ownership. So we talked about sovereignty of data in federated data models, but obviously that extends to workers, survivors, and others. How does that work? I'm going to go to Hannah first, I think, because I know there were some topics there around formatting and perhaps value of data and insights. Would you like to pick up any of those questions, Hannah?
Cool. I can maybe even start with the trade unions and worker organizations. We've worked with trade unions and worker organizations with our worker voice tool. Just like any organization, they have groups of workers that they are trying to support, and they also need to understand the conditions of work that these workers are facing. So we've had, actually in Thailand, we've had conversations with worker organizations there to help them to understand how the workers are being exploited currently, and what, say, PPE they might need, and how they can, it allows them to get information together in the same way as anyone else would, to be able to best represent the workers who are in their organizations. In this case, they often will turn on the switch for the phone numbers so that they can contact and further support offline the workers in their organizations. Formatting data for collection. A great question there. For us, we do structured responses for most of our data that we collect, because I'm a computer scientist and I like structured data. It's much easier to analyze. So we structure everything. Many things are single choice from a selection. It just helps us to understand. We are now looking at adding more free text information, because we know there's more nuance that is required in some cases. Anything that we collect, we try to standardize, because then it's easier to share across different platforms. We had a US dollar funded project, and that one had what I called my taxonomy of exploitation. So there we align to a taxonomy of what exploitation looks like in this sector, so that we can bring in different risk data from multiple sources, meaningfully bring it together. And I feel you had an example that you shared before of using OpenAI to structure data. The part that was really interesting for me was looking at structuring data into categories. And so things like that can be used to help with the formatting of data for collection as well. Maybe I'll give everyone else a chance.
I was just going to jump in off the back of Hannah and just agree with the AI usability. I think the data that we've been collecting has very much been past focused. So it's already been collected in any format that the organization needed to collect it in at the time. So we haven't been sharing. Originally, we were going to share a common framework and ask all the organizations to filter it as we required. But obviously, with the resource constraints I mentioned earlier, that's where AI has been hugely helpful in kind of filtering it into one common framework. But moving forward, we're very keen to kind of work with organizations to make sure they're collecting data in, a more structured way.
Fabulous. Wenjue.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. So I just want to add some examples to answer the question about how the data collected are used to create actions or changes. One example is like our assessment data are often used for reimbursement to workers. So which I think, some of, I want to give some acknowledgement to some brands who are in this room to really push for that to happen. It's like making repayment to workers based on the data collected. Another example is like what research data collected can be done. It's our research in the electronic sector in Malaysia, which directly led to the zero fee policy in the ICT sector adopted by RBA. That's a good example of how data collected can be used to create change. But we're not satisfied. Those are still remediation. Well, zero fee is it's good. It's already getting into prevention. But when we say zero fee, we're still not clear about who is paying. We want the employer pay from zero fee to employer pay. That's why we're calling for measure the payment made by employers. Yeah. Thank
you. Let's take another 4 questions. Thank you.
How will data privacy and protection be managed across different regions, especially where data regulations vary? What do you do to advocate data sharing among organizations, especially in business and human rights, where that data can create real impact? And the third one is curious to understand the data validation process. How could we vet the data from the workers are true, especially regarding the fee payment? How can we avoid the workers mark up the fee amount through interview?
Good. All right. So the first one is tough, right? So the first one was around privacy across regions. So there are various personal data protection bills in various different countries that put different guidelines related to where data should be stored and so on. Also other sort of legal options for people's data. We've got data sharing advocacy in corporates. Super hard, right? Because corporates are primarily incentivized to not share data. They are trying to keep things confidential. So what are the barriers how do we overcome those? And then, yes, the truth of data. How do we know in that sort of moment of interview that actually that person is likely to be telling the truth for lots of different reasons, I suppose. Okay, who would like to go first? Can I go to you, Hannah, again? Any thoughts on those 3 topics?
Yeah, sure. I'm interested in the data validation. We assume that a worker is telling the truth. Why would we assume that they're not? And I could ask the same question about any other source of input. If you look at statistics, you can always find data that will tell your story. So I could say the same about many other things. And I know that we've referred in previous panels today about how some suppliers have passed audits, but then failed when you go and look at, there are these big investigations that happen. So yes, you need to vet data like any type of input that you receive. You can't have a case based on one report. A report is a signal that there can be an issue. We use data triangulation, and we bring different actors' voices together, and we say, hey, there is an inconsistency here. This needs to be analyzed. So that is how we validate our data as well, but maybe also we shouldn't always consider that the worker is not telling the truth at the beginning.
Thank you. And Raya, any insights from you? Just use the
Yes,
word insight again.
Insight. I just really want to applaud Hannah. I fully agree with what you're saying. I think just having that trust in worker voice is something that we're really big on at Impact, and amplifying that voice in kind of an ethical and meaningful way. But I was just interested in the kind of encouraging data sharing among organizations. I think that's something I touched on previously, that I think you just have to find how you can like you say, they really want to be involved if there's a benefit to them. And if you can demonstrate the tangible benefit, people in human rights departments of our brands that we're working with are tearing their hair out with this issue week on, week out. So I think just demonstrating to them how the outputs can be a tangible solution and actually save them money and resource in the long term is really what has worked for us.
Yeah, it's got to be genuinely useful, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think for any organisation to be involved in a tech initiative. Wenjue, was there anything you wanted to add to those questions?
Well, about data validation, right? I guess one comment is about like the strangers, the social auditors going into facilities for our work site, doing assessment. How do you validate the data? You often get conflicting data, like the documents on record, like saying something about the fees paid. Well, workers would report a different amount. And then how do you validate that? That involves a lot of work. The first thing is like, how can you get high confidence in your worker data? That really involves a lot with your auditor's training and your methodology of interviewing workers. Then for the record, for the documents, the records that says lower amount, then you need to probably do desk research, and you need to interview various stakeholders and to cross-check that information. And so it's not like only a tech work. You talk about the AI.
That's the easy bit, isn't it?
Yeah. It's really a lot of work goes behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're just coming to the end of our allotted time here. I mean, just some of the topics we talked about here were quite vast, and the last one just around you can build all the tech you like, but if you don't take your time, right, in considering how to get your data in an ethical way, in a way which was equitable, then it's likely that it's going to be all a waste of time. And other points, who decides what the impact is that our data project is trying to work out, and building the discussion that way as well, and lots of other points. Listen, thank you all so much. That's the end of our time today. Please just give a round of applause for our wonderful panelists.